My pleasure to send a warm welcome to Sam Rowe, who will tell us in the next, I think about 30 minutes, something about his works and his idea concerning this this issue. Sam Rowe is an investigative reporter at the Chicago Tribune. He was part of the reporting team that won the 2008 Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting for an examination of unsafe children products. And also this year he has been a Pulitzer finalist 4 times. This year, most recently in 2017, for an investigation into dangerous prescription drug combinations. He is working and in many collaborations with data scientists at Columbia University Medical Center in this field of drugs especially. And he has featured one of his work in the film Merchants of Doubt, which resulted in the reduction of toxic chemicals in the United States furniture. And he's also, it's another bridge between science and journalism. He teaches at the Columbia College in Chicago, and he is not only doing journalism, he also coaches youth baseball. Sam Rowe. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's your floor.
I think coaching baseball takes more time than journalism. Thank you so much. It is quite an honor and privilege to be here among so many dedicated journalists and talented journalists and scientists. And I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this particular topic, scientists and journalists coming together. I truly believe that this is the next great step in investigative reporting. Editors and reporters collaborating with top scientists to identify pressing problems, to solve intractable problems, and to hold people accountable so those problems are fixed and they don't come back. These kinds of collaborations, they're doable, they're exciting, and they work. And in many ways, they also make sense, don't they? Think of all the reasons, all the things we share, the scientists and journalists share together. Scientists and journalists both like to go out into the field, make observations, and come back and write them down. We both like to collect data. We both like to analyze data. We both like to weigh evidence. Scientists and journalists both value facts, precision, accuracy. Those things are vital to us. We both like to publish something at the end of all our work, hopefully. But I think the value that scientists and journalists share the most is that many of us got into this profession because we wanted to change the world. We wanted to make a difference. And that's important. I think we're like-minded, scientists and journalists. Now, historically, scientists and journalists haven't worked together closely, have they? Scientists will go out and they'll do their research, and if it's deemed newsworthy or important enough, a journalist may write a story about it and interview the scientist, and that's sort of where it stops. If a scientist and journalist would work more closely, they may be criticized for crossing some ethical line or introducing bias into the research or bias into the story. What if we challenged that assumption just for a moment and began to change that thinking a little bit? What if, not in all stories, but in certain circumstances, in certain stories, we combine the skills and the talents and the resources and the staff of both professions and tackle the world's most pressing problems? What if we combine forces to do spectacular things? Now, at the Chicago Tribune, we've worked with scientists for several years in varying degrees, and I think we've had some pretty good luck. Most recently, we combined with scientists at the Columbia University Medical Center in New York, with data scientists, pharmacologists, cellular researchers. And what we did is we investigated dangerous prescription drug interactions, how one drug alters the effect of another. We looked at data in entirely new ways, really cool ways. Dr. Nicholas Tatanetti, he's going to be here tomorrow, and we're going to explain that. It's really exciting. But what we did is we looked at big data and we discovered drug combinations that no one knew about that were causing a potentially fatal heart arrhythmia. And we got a pretty good story out of that in the journal, in the Chicago Tribune. The scientists published a scientific study in a journal the same day that we came out with our story in the newspaper. So you had the findings rolling out in two different fields on the same day, in journalism and in science. So these collaborations, they can work. As a follow-up to that, we did an investigation on prescription drugs by working with the University of Washington State and the University of Arizona, where we went into pharmacies to see if the pharmacies would sell us drugs that combined would cause serious harm or death. So we went in with one prescription that was safe by itself, this drug. We went in with a prescription for another drug that was safe by itself, but taken together, they could kill you. And we wanted to see if American pharmacies would sell us those drug combinations without warning us. And in 52% of the time, they did. And that is really bad. That story had tremendous impact in America. Pharmacies across the country, the biggest pharmacy chains, made significant safety steps, the largest safety reforms in a generation in American pharmacies. We couldn't have done that story had we not collaborated with the University of Arizona and the University of Washington. We could not have found undiscovered drug interactions that could potentially harm the heart if we hadn't worked with Columbia University. So it shows you the value of working together. These collaborations achieve results. And what better time to be here and talk about this topic and have this conversation. I don't know about in Germany. Back in the US, Donald Trump is no fan of science or fact or evidence. He calls journalists sick and enemies of the people. He calls us enemies of the people. I mean, those are fighting words, right? But I think the way we fight back is not by just getting angry at Trump or laughing at Trump. I think the way we fight back, one way, is to just stay focused and do what we do best. And that is serving the public. Journalists serving the public, scientists serving the public, and maybe, in some instances, journalists and scientists coming together to serve the public. Now, there are many benefits of working together. We've heard some of them already. Scientists can help journalists because they're scientists. They are, in many cases, the experts on the topic. And they have access, this is very important, they have access to data that a reporter wouldn't normally have access to. Scientists add credibility and heft to a reporter's work. That's important, especially in investigative reporting, when you may produce a piece of work that the subject of your investigation, whether it's a person, a company, an entity, they may not like what you write. They may not like your findings. And so they'll fight back, they'll attack you with their own scientists, their own experts in their own science. So if you're going to collaborate, it's good to have some really good scientists on your side. Why should scientists collaborate with journalists? I think this is actually the trickier question. But journalists bring to the table ideas. Journalists often are the center of so many issues, and they can see things that maybe scientists can't see. For instance, let's say you have a polluted river. A simple story, you have a river with a lot of pollution, and the reporter is going to write about that. So the reporter may go out and interview people who live along the river to find out how they're affected. She may go out and interview the chemical company that's polluting the river. She may interview the politicians, the regulators, the lawmakers. She'll talk to the scientists who are studying the pollution's effects. She'll talk to the lawyers who represent each of these entities, right? So she's in the center of this issue. The reporter is uniquely situated to see what the problem is and how to fix it, and maybe what research is needed in that particular topic. The scientists may be talking to some of these entities, but not all of them. That's not their job. It's the journalist's job to talk to everyone and to understand the issue and come back and be able to explain it in layman's terms. The journalists can also help scientists, and the journalists can hold people accountable in ways scientists really don't. That's not central to what they do, but it's central to what journalists do. Journalists can go to the chemical company and say, why are you polluting the river? Or the journalist can go to the politician and say, you said you were going to clean up the river, but you haven't. Well, why aren't you doing anything? So journalists do that, and that keeps the story, keeps an issue alive. It's just not one piece of research. It's not just one story. If you do that, it's many stories over a long period of time, and that's how you affect change. That's how you can make a difference in the world. Journalists have a lot of power and a lot of influence, and I think sometimes we tend to forget that. So let me tell you a little bit about how the Chicago Tribune got involved in working with scientists and the hard lessons we've learned and some of the obstacles, in case you were thinking about doing this, and I hope you all do. I've been an investigative reporter for about 30 years, and for the last 3 decades, I've done stories in a very similar way. Same way with a lot of investigative reporters. We have a similar mindset, and that is go out and find the bad guys. Find the bad guys doing bad things. And we find examples of bad behavior, and we find another example of bad behavior and another, and we put them into a pile. And if you have enough examples of bad behavior, you have a story. And if your pile is big enough, maybe someone will pay attention, and something will happen, some change will come about. Now, I've used this approach to stories for so many years because it works. It's an approach that works. I've written about bad police officers and bad doctors and bad lawyers and bad nursing homes, I mean, you name it. But I've often wondered as I'm doing that, is there another way to do this? Is there a different approach to journalism, maybe a broader approach to investigative journalism? Instead of always focusing on the bad guys, why not bring people together to solve the problems before tragedy strikes and bad things happen? Now, there's already something called solutions journalism, in which reporters write lengthy explanatory pieces about social problems and how to fix them. I guess I'm talking about something different, though. I'm talking about taking this one step forward. Instead of just interviewing scientists and watching them work, what if we work with them? What if we collaborated with them to do studies, to find answers, to make discoveries, and to maybe even invent new things, to come up with inventions? We tried this at Columbia University, working with Columbia University on the issue of dangerous prescription drug interactions. And we did it because there was just no other way to do the story. We did not have, as journalists, we did not have the expertise or the knowledge or the data to do this story on our own. So we had to seek out help. We needed a collaboration. And another reason we did this is because the story was worth it. It was an important topic. Drug combinations, dangerous drug combinations, have been a major world health problem for years and years. In the United States, 20% of all Americans take 3 or more drugs. 11% of Americans take 5 or more medications. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of drugs. It may not be you, right? You may not be taking more than one medication or any. If you don't, you're lucky or young. But trust me, as you get older, that may change, and you may be taking more than one drug. So it may affect you. Or if this issue doesn't affect you now, it may affect your parents or grandparents or your children. But this is also a topic that has a lot of unknowns, because there are so many drugs on the marketplace these days, and there's so many different combinations of drugs. It's seemingly impossible to know all the effects those medications could have on your body. There's just too many drugs, and there are too many combinations. Still, I was interested in this topic, and I wanted to narrow it down to which drug combinations were most serious, which ones cause the most harm. And there are some drugs that, taken together, can cause sudden cardiac death. So that seemed like a topic worth exploring. Now, some drugs are already known to cause that. I wanted to know are there other drugs out there that no one knows about that are causing people to die suddenly of heart failure? But where to start? I mean, I'm not a doctor. I didn't have access to this kind of data, and I know actually very little about coding and algorithms and things of that nature. I was telling you earlier, I don't even own a computer. But I had this question. And so that research led me to Dr. Nick Tatnetti. He was like me. I was intrigued by big data, and I was intrigued by the concept of signal detection. And I wondered, could signal detection be used in big data to make predictions about which drugs could be harming the heart? And I saw that in my research, saw that Dr. Tatnetti at Columbia University, he was working in this area too. He was a perfect person, I thought, to go talk to. So I went down and sat next to him. I went down, sat across from him, and I said, listen, I'm really interested in your models. I love your algorithms. I love what you're doing. Can we take your models and can we apply it to this concept of looking for drug interactions that affect the heart? And he said, yeah, I think so, but I'm not an expert. He said, I'm not an expert in heart failure. I don't know much about that. And I said, I do, and I think he'll help. So I went out to Arizona, and I met with a source of mine, Dr. Ray Woosley. He was a former dean of the University of Arizona Medical School. And I said, you're an expert in this heart function. We have an expert in New York who's doing some really cool things with big data. Can we team up and maybe solve this problem? He said, yeah, let's do it. And so this team was born. And so over the course of this project, I went out to New York numerous times and met with Dr. Tatnetti, his graduate students, and we brainstormed, we bounced around ideas, I documented our progress, we talked to Dr. Woosley in Arizona via conference call, and in the end, the computer model that we built showed that there were dozens and dozens of combinations of drugs out there that could cause sudden cardiac death. And so this was quite interesting to us, but we thought, as you might guess, that that could be a lot of noise. And this is where it comes in, journalists working with scientists are so important. We were then able to take our predictions, our initial analysis, and cross-check them against the medical records at Columbia University Medical Center, at the hospital, going back into the 80s. 4 million patients, 300,000 files on patients, billions of bits of information. So we had all this information, and we could take our predictions, our data analysis predictions, and see if it was coming true in the real world. It was one of the best medical archives in the country, and so we were able to double check our work. And we were able to narrow down our predictions to a few combinations. Then, to take the science one step further, we went to a building, coincidentally it was right next door to Dr. Tatnetti's office, and there were cellular researchers there, and we asked them if they could help us further to even triple check our work. And they agreed. And so what we did is we took single cells and we injected a suspicious drug combination that we were interested in into a single cell to see if it would have an effect on the cell. And it did. These two drugs together blocked the crucial channel in the cell that regulates heart function. And so it validated some of our findings. So this was great. I thought this was really cool. We started with this big idea, with just a universe of data, a lot of unknowns, and at the end of our project, 2 years, it took a long time, but we were then down to a single cell to see if our predictions about this universe of data was true, down to a single cell, and that was really cool. So we got a decent story out of it. It really resonated with readers. Readers really loved it. The scientists, when they published their paper on the same results, it was in the leading cardiology journal in the world. So both the journalists and scientists were really happy with the way things turned out. And now I can stand up here and confidently say, because it worked out, I can confidently say it was a lot of fun to do. It was fun, but there were moments, it was stressful. And there were bumps in the road, and there are lessons that we learned, and here are some of them. One, these kinds of collaborations, scientists and journalists working together, they're time-consuming, expensive, and risky. Time-consuming, expensive, and risky. 3 words your editors do not want to hear about your story. Now, time-consuming and expensive, I think all big investigations are time-consuming and expensive. That's just the way it is. But why risky? Risky because you don't have control. In a collaboration, you don't own your own project. You have to collaborate with someone else. You have to share. And sometimes that's hard. But it's very important. You have to understand that another organization has their own rules and regulations and culture and politics. In fact, some universities may not be able to collaborate with journalists. There are some research projects at universities that have to go through an internal review board process, and it may take a year to get approval to get that research. And at the end, the researcher's colleagues may say, you can do the research, but you can't use those journalists as research assistants. That's just not going to happen. So it can be pretty complex. Now, we've worked in the past with scientists where we, at the Tribune, had a lot of control over our stories. For instance, we work with the University of Rutgers and the University of Iowa to test products. Pretty simple story, but we tested seafood, commercial seafood, for mercury. We tested lead in toys and children's product for lead. And what we did is we bought products and we sent it off to a lab and had them test that to see if there was illegal amounts of those heavy metals. And they collaborated with us on methodology and protocols. But I don't really consider that a collaboration because we were paying the scientists. We were paying for them to do something for us, and it was a service they would provide anyone. The Columbia story was different. We weren't paying the Columbia scientists to help us find dangerous drug interactions. They could have walked away at any time. They could have said, we're tired of working with you, we don't like you anymore, see you later. Or they could have switched jobs. I mean, the story took 2 years to do, and over a period of time, people switch jobs. Or they have different things to do. Or we could have done different things. We could have moved on. A couple times I came back from New York after meeting with Dr. Tadnetti, and my boss would say, so how's things going? How's the project? How's the progress of the story? And I'd say, it's slow. It's slow. And he'd say, he goes, can't you do anything to speed those scientists up? Can't you get them going? And I said, no. They don't work for us. They don't work for us. Just like we don't work for them, right? We were relying on their goodwill to help us carry out an experiment. And so when you do these collaborations, you have to find like-minded people, and you have to hope, it's a leap of faith, you have to hope that they have the same goals as you do, and they'll stick with it. So my advice on this topic is, if you're heading into it, and you're going to collaborate with someone, and you know the risks involved, I would just be patient and not worry, and sort of embrace the differences, because we can learn a lot by working together. And if your project doesn't work out, if it collapses completely, so what? I mean, you tried. You tried. You'll go to journalism heaven because you tried. Secondly, if you're going to collaborate with someone, I would obviously pick your teammates very wisely. Make sure that they're credible. Journalists should seek out, I think, the best scientists they can find on the topic. Go to them in person, sit down with them, show them that you're serious, show them that you understand the topic, beg if necessary, because it's really important to have good scientists on your side, because your story not only has to be, your story's not only going to face journalistic scrutiny, your story's going to face scientific scrutiny. If a journalist writes about scientists, scientists are going to read it, and they're going to read it closely. So you want to have good scientists on your side. In terms of scientists working with journalists, the media is defined this big these days. And so scientists have to be careful about who they work with. They should work with someone who's very serious about the topic, who maybe has a track record in this area, or at least comes to them with some knowledge or something they can offer. When I was doing some of my early work with scientists, I I wanted to make a lot of my stories scientifically rigorous. I wanted to follow very specific protocols and methods. And for instance, the story of testing fish for mercury, I wanted to follow very specific protocols. And it worked out. The story not only was published in the paper, but it was also published in a scientific journal. But early on, my editor would challenge me on this. He said, why does this story have to be scientific? I mean, why do you have to do it in a scientific way? And I said, because it makes the story better. It elevates the story. And he goes, well, you're not a scientist. You're a reporter. Reporters don't do science. And I said, says who? Why not? I'm not a writer like Tolstoy or Hemingway, but you asked me to write. I mean, that's part of my job. I'm going to try to write well. So when you do an investigation with a scientific component or with some data, yes, you should think like a scientist. You should elevate your story to that level. Because again, it's going to face journalistic scrutiny and scientific scrutiny. But I think the very best argument for collaborating, scientists and journalists collaborating, is that in many cases, it's just the right thing to do. It's morally the right thing to do. If you have a topic that can save lives or prevent illnesses, and the only way you can do it is working with scientists, or it makes that story much better, then you should do that. I had an old journalism professor by the name of Mel Mencher, and he used to always tell us that journalism isn't a job, it's a moral endeavor. And the greatest ethical sin in journalism is to do nothing. Is to just throw up your hand and say, well, it's too hard, it's too risky, too many questions, I'm just not going to do it. So if you pick a topic to do a collaboration on, if you pick a topic that's worthy of a collaboration, that's worthy of an investigation, I think you'll beat back some of the criticism and some of the doubts in your own mind, because this will come up in your own mind. Oh, should I be doing this or not? If you pick a topic that's very important, that could help people and save lives, I think those fears go away. So that brings us to this week. I really look forward to being here and talk to as many of you as possible and to share ideas, to bounce some ideas around. And before I leave here on Friday, my goal is to come away with several ideas that some of us or all of us could do together. I'd love to be able to do a cross-border project of taking some of the best journalists in this room and some of the top scientists and start doing something. And my goal, again, is to look back on this conference maybe next year, 2 years, 5 years, whenever, however long it takes, and say, we accomplished something really ambitious and something grand, and it started in this room or in a conversation in that hall or a conversation in the bar or wherever, but we did it. At this conference this week, we set out and we did something really compelling and ambitious. So thank you very much for having me here. I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to meeting you all, and hopefully we can start on something and create something very special. Thank you so much.